Good morning, everyone. My name is Trisha. Good morning, everyone. My name is Trisha Teofilo Olave, and I am a legal supervisor here at the National Immigrant Justice Center. I supervise our VAWA and U Visa Pro Bono project. So we wanted to have a webinar for you all today regarding working effectively with a trained interpreter. This is something that comes up very often in our pro bono projects, and we thought it would be useful for all of you to hear some tips specifically, and I'd like to introduce you to Eddie Tam. He's the Associate Director at Cross Cultural Interpreting Services. Eddie?
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you and joining us this morning. I'm the Associate Director from Cross Cultural Interpreting Services, and I have also worked as an interpreter for a number of years. We identify ourselves as CCIS for short. In the past years, I have received numerous common questions regarding hire interpreters, their qualification, our screening process for interpreters. So I'm hoping by using this webinar, it would help us to address some of these common questions. But first, let me talk a little bit, cover a little bit of the background about CCIS. I'm very proud to say that CCIS is the first language service provider established in Chicago. The program started in 1996. So last year was, we celebrate our 20-year anniversary. So we have more experience.
Sorry about that, folks. A little bit of technical difficulties. I think we're set up again. If you're having any problems, just shoot us a message on the webinar. Go ahead, Eddie.
Okay, sorry about that. As I was mentioning, that we have a 20-year of experience in providing the language interpretation than any agencies in Chicagoland. We built a model based on our mission. We provide language help to the vulnerable individuals, and we are dedicated to improving access to services for limited and non-English speaking communities, individuals through high quality language services. Okay.
Thank you, Eddie. So I wanted to mention too that if people have questions, go ahead and type your question in the webinar box there, the chat box, and we'll address the questions at the end of the webinar. So Eddie's going to continue more now with what they do specifically at CCIS.
Okay, so the type of services that we provide, we provide document translation services. We provide free estimates and consultation on document translation projects. For example, if you have a document completed in Word, feel free to submit your document as an attachment to translations at heartlandalliance.org. We can provide you a deadline with price estimate based on the source to target language. The translation estimates are based on word counts and the source language. We also have to consider the layout of the page. Some clients wanted the English version and the translated document to look alike. We assign a team of translators, a translator and an editor to each project. So there is a check and balance in place to ensure the accuracy of each translate project. Interpreting services. We provide in-person or on-site interpreting. Our interpreters would come to your office or the designated location to assist your language needs. As a supplement, we provide also by telephone in case of emergency, or it could also serve as a backup. Or sometimes that attorney can need to access languages that are not frequently requested. We provide interpreter training to support the on-site interpreting services. To be eligible for the training, all individuals must first pass a language assessment exam, and all of the CCIS interpreters first must complete a minimum of 45 hours of training and complete a minimum of 12 hours of internship. And I'm going to talk about a little bit more about the assessment exam later on.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to talk about a little bit how to use the CCIS interpreting services. Okay. Before we can provide services to a client, we have to establish a letter of agreement. We would need some basic information in order to draft up this agreement, such as like the name of the organization, the address, the contractual information. A draft agreement would then be sent to the client for signature. And after we receive the request information, after we receive the signed agreement, then we would set up an account for that organization. After an account is complete, we would provide username, password to each user or requester. They can then make requests through our on-site interpreters online scheduling system. So the information entered there is quite accurate. And as a second option, any callers or requesters can feel free to call our main number and to speak to one of the CCIS staff to request for on-site interpreters. So we are always there to help you, and we always have an on-call person to take calls also after hours. Our clients don't have to worry about or if they realize that they need some language help and at 7 o'clock at night and they want to schedule someone for the next day. So we are there to at least try to help them to set that up. Okay.
So Eddie,
yeah.
Do we set up an account for all types of interpretation, whether phone or in person?
Yes, you can set up the agreement. You can have one or the other or both. My suggestion is that set up both. There is absolutely no minimum charge, no monthly charge, so it can't hurt to sign up with us, and you can just put it away. You don't need it, then don't call us, and there's no charge at all. And when you need it, because it takes a while to set up an account, so you don't want to realize that in 2 days you need an interpreter, and now you are become stressful for anyone to try to set up the account, have the urgency to set up the account.
Great. And then the on-call person who's available after hours, that would be available for people that have an account. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is correct. So that you, and the client can contact us if there's a change of the time of the appointment, or they realize that the appointment is not appropriate or something happened. They can at least contact us so that we can communicate with the assigned interpreter if necessary.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay. So after your account is completely set up, okay, you can call us, pick up the phone, call us, or you can make the request through the online scheduling system. Then the CCIS staff would help you to identify an interpreter. We would identify the interpreter who lives the closest to the designated location, expand the search if necessary, And one thing I want to share with you, our interpreters are working as independent contractors, and they accept work as they go. So for this reason, the more time that you give us, the better the chance to find an interpreter. So currently, for the in-person interpretation services, we can provide you or support 40 different languages. Okay. For telephonic interpreters, we provide you with an 800 number and an access code. And you should only share this information with the authorized users. And when you need to access a telephonic interpreter, it takes less than a minute to find an interpreter for most common languages. Telephonic interpreting services are available 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. We offer about 180 different languages. For most languages, there is no need to make a reservation or reserve an interpreter. You pick up the phone, you dial the 800 number and provide an access code. Our agent may ask a couple very simple information, such as the name of the caller, the name of your program, the access code, and the language that you need. Just a few pieces of information, and you will be connected to a telephonic interpreter within, I would say, 30 seconds or a minute in most cases.
So that was 40 different languages for in-person interpretation and 180 different languages for telephonic?
That is correct.
That's impressive.
Yeah, because we can provide more languages because by telephone, we can provide more languages because we tap into the language pool, not only within Chicago area. We can use folks from outside the Chicago area. So that's why the pool is much bigger than the more languages that we can support by telephone. Now this comes up like quite a bit, and there are folks that would like to use the same interpreter. We recognize that there are times that client would like to use the same interpreter for follow-up sessions. Our on-site interpreters, they are required to wear the CCIS issued ID card. And on that ID card, it's got the name of the agency and the name of the interpreter and the language or languages that the interpreter able to interpret. Okay. For the telephonic interpreters, they would give out their ID card ID number at the beginning of each session. So be sure to take down the the ID number or the name of the interpreter so that you can make future requests through CCIS, and we will be happy to honor the request if the interpreter is available.
I think that's a very good point, because a lot of our clients will develop a rapport with an interpreter and feel comfortable with that person, and it will be much easier for them to continue their case and working with their pro bono attorney if they're using that same interpreter. And we understand that it might not always be possible, but that's great that you provide that availability. I also think if you have a rewarding experience and a positive experience with one interpreter, you might be more likely to use that person in the future on other cases. So that's a great opportunity.
Absolutely. And I want to mention that the same interpreter may not be available, and it's not because the interpreter don't want to work with the client or whatnot. It's the interpreter's schedule. For example, a telephonic interpreter he or she may be working in shift, or maybe they are on another call when you need to use that person. And sometimes the on-site interpreter, they have other obligations. They may be in school trying to earn a degree, and we have numerous CCIS interpreters. They are college students. So we understand that there are good reasons and advantages to use the same interpreter. I just want all of us to keep that in mind and to recognize the limits that we encounter. All right. This comes up quite a bit also. I hear that from the clients and potential clients that they sometimes they would say identify as a translator and interpreter, and sometimes in the same sentence they would identify, can I have a translator, and then later on they would say that an interpreter. So there is a difference between a translator and an interpreter. Okay, the primary job function of an interpreter is to facilitate understanding and communications between two people, or at least two people who are speaking different languages. And I'm going to emphasize here speaking. An interpreter helps us to communicate verbally with your client. So the translator is in written form. If you want your document to translate from English to another language, that way you would use a translator. Using family or friends as interpreters, okay? Why do clients want to bring a family to use interpreters, okay? And what problems could arise? Okay.
I think that this comes up quite frequently because with our clients, oftentimes they're used to using their family members as interpreters. It's been the way they've done it their whole lives, and it's very easy access, right? And they're familiar with these people, but I am sure there's a large number of problems that could arise, one just being that that person might be biased.
Absolutely. There's always that misconception, and sometimes a client may think that he or she may be more comfortable when they use a family member or a friend to serve as an interpreter. There are a number of problems that may come up. How do we know the interpreter's language abilities? Does that interpreter know about the interpreter code of ethics, especially confidentiality? And as you mentioned, the interpreters may be biased, may not be interpreting the entire sentence because of the bias. All right. And also let me go back to talk about a little bit about a qualified interpreter. Okay. So I mentioned a little earlier, so all of the CCIS interpreter has complete and passed a language assessment exam before attending the 45-hour, we're set at 45 hours interpreting training. And then in addition to that, the interpreter complete the training has to attend a minimum of 12 hours of internship. So according to the NCIHC and the IMIA, the NCIHC stands for the National Council on Interpreting in Healthcare. The IMIA stands for the International Medical Interpreters Association. And they set up the standard is at 40 hours is the minimum. Now I understand that this webinar is about interpreting in legal settings, but so please understand that I am using this standard as a benchmark, so that there has got to be very good reasons that the number of training hours the NCIHC and the IMIA require. That's the national certification standard. So to be eligible for the 45-hour interpreter training, so a qualified interpreter must first pass a verbal assessment exam that meets the ACTFL standards. The ACTFL standards stands for American Council Teaching Foreign Language Standards. That means if someone that passed this exam, that person can speak with linguistic ease, confidence, and competence. He's consistently able to explain in detail and narrate fully and accurately in all time frames if he passed the assessment exam. He can discuss some topics abstractly, especially those relating to his special fields of expertise.
I think this is great. It's especially important in the kinds of cases we're dealing with court proceedings and USCIS interviews. Legal work can be very, very complicated, and too often I've seen it happen where a client will bring in their family member or even their child and expect them to be able to interpret when that person just doesn't understand the seriousness and the importance of accuracy with interpretation. So thank you for clarifying this.
Absolutely. Now, a qualified interpreter is not necessarily a qualified translator. A qualified translator, with the interpreter, the language assessment exam that I referred to earlier, we assess the person's language in speaking abilities. We don't assess their written abilities. So an interpreter isn't worrying about the, let's say, spelling. A misspelled word could change the meaning of an entire sentence. Let me talk about a little bit about the mode of interpreting that's used in the legal settings. Okay. So we have consecutive, we have simultaneous, and sight translation. Consecutive means one person speaks at a time. Speakers would take turns to speak. And this practice makes the conversation very precise because one person, we all take turns to speak. So one person speaks at a time. Simultaneous means the interpreter speaks almost at the same time as the speaker. It depends on the interpreter's preference. Sometimes the interpreter would fall a whole sentence behind on purpose. So this practice allows the interpreter to hear the entire sentence first before interpreting. This mode makes it more difficult for an audience to hear, as you can imagine that the increased noise level when two people are speaking at the same time. Sight translation is used, for example, when an interpreter is reading a document out loud in the target language to your non-English speaking client because the document is written in English. Introduction from an interpreter. Okay, so this is an example of an introduction used by an on-site interpreter. In fact, we have more questions about on-site interpreting. So for this reason, we are going to focus more about on-site interpreting. So the introduction goes like this. Hello, Mrs. Jones. My name is Eddie. I am an interpreter from CCIS. During this session, please look at and speak directly to the client. I will interpret everything that you say exactly as you say it. Speak in short sentences and pause frequently so that I can interpret accurately. I will raise my hand as a signal when I need you to pause. Everything that is said will be kept confidential. This introduction will be used in the target language as well if the interpreter is speaking to the non-English speaking client. Introduction to both parties is required.
I think this is also helpful in terms of thinking about those of us who may speak another language and work with our clients in another language, but then the client will have to be using an interpreter in court or at an immigration interview. It's important to be able to explain this to your client so that they understand the interpreter is going to be speaking directly to the client, right? So
correct.
This is good. Even if you yourself don't need to use an interpreter very often, occasionally your client will have to. So these are good tips to keep in mind.
Good. Let's see. Okay. What I'm going to do now is that I'm going to explain the purpose of this introduction. So I'm going to break it down to one sentence at a time. One sentence, the first sentence I say is, hello, Mrs. Jones, my name is Eddie. I'm an interpreter from CCIS. So the interpreter identifies himself by his name, and he also named the agency at the beginning of each session. The attorney could use this opportunity to take down the name of the interpreter and the name of the agency so that he can request for him when follow-up appointments are needed. During this session, please look at and speak directly to the client. Quite often, a speaker thinks she is speaking to the interpreter because the interpreter is the one who understands the language that she uses in the session. For this reason, the speaker often looks at the interpreter instead of the intended audience. The interpreter is reminding the attorney and the client that they should be speaking and looking at each other, not at the interpreter. They are the ones having conversation. I will interpret everything that you say exactly as you say it. The interpreter is reminding the attorney and his client that everything said in the session will be repeated. Each speaker should pay attention to the volume of the speech, the clarity of the speech, the pace of their speech, and pause to allow time for the interpreter to speak, and so on. Speak in short sentences and pause frequently so that I can interpret accurately. During the session, sometimes the speaker gets emotional and his speech may be faster than normal, or the speaker is not stopping to allow the interpreter to interpret. The interpreter is informing all parties involved that accuracy can be maintained if each speaker speaks in short sentences. I will raise my hand as a signal when I need you to pause. The interpreter is establishing a hand signal to use if intervention is needed during the session. He would actually show the hand signal that he would use. The interpreter might use this chance to ask the speaker to slow down the speech, repeat the message if it was not clear, or simply repeat the message louder. Everything that is said will be kept confidential. The interpreter emphasizes to all parties that confidentiality will be maintained. He wants to inform all parties that he has been trained and he's a professional and knows the code of ethics for interpreters very well. And hopefully by saying that, this would ease the client's anxiety. Interpreter will intervene when, okay, I would like to mention a couple of things. I would just want to quickly summarize some of the reasons that the interpreter might stop the session or intervene the session. Okay. Speaker uses a term that must be explained. Sometimes terms or words have multiple meanings. The interpreter wanted to know the intended meaning, and we all have done it at one time or another. We, the speakers, all have used terms or words that are familiar to us, but others may not. The interpreter needs the speaker to repeat. Sometimes the speaker speaks too soft or too fast. Speaker is not pausing to let the interpreter interpret. There are times that the speaker got emotional and speak much quicker than usual. A trained interpreter will always interpret in first person. Using first person is the norm for all interpreters. It sounds very strange at first when an interpreter uses I, and it may take the audience a few minutes to get used to the interpreter speaking in first person. An attorney can help by speaking in first person instead of tell my client that, or tell him that, tell her that. So just stick with the I. Your gestures may not carry the same meaning in the client's culture. And we all have done that at one time or another, and we use gestures, and when we speak, gestures are a form of the nonverbal communication in which visible bodily actions are used to emphasize or to use to communicate important messages. However, our gestures may not carry the intended meaning in the client's culture.
Eddie, if the client is using gestures and you or the interpreter are unsure of what they mean, would the interpreter pause and ask the client to explain?
Yes. If the interpreter does not know what the client means, the interpreter would stop the session and would clarify, would use that opportunity to clarify, what do you mean by this gesture?
Great.
Okay. Now, in our culture, we use gestures. So, starting with an index finger, meaning that the index finger is sticking out and moves repeatedly towards the person who is doing the gesture like a hook. Come here was the intended meaning. In Philippines and in Somalia, this is offensive. The person who is doing the gesture is calling the other person an animal, like, come here, you little dog. Form a circle with your thumb and forefinger. The speaker wants to indicate okay or approve. In French, for example, you are really saying the person on the receiving end is worthless. You great big zero. Okay, and there are other meanings too, but we'll just stick with that one. Let's stick with the PG version, if you want to call that a PG version. Okay, thumb up with a closed fist. The speaker wants to indicate as all good. In Afghanistan, Nigeria, South America, the Middle East, this is an obscene insult meaning, like sit on it or up yours. It is their equivalent to ours, holding up a middle finger. Nodding your head. Okay, the speaker is nodding his head up and down to say yes or I agree. In Bulgaria and Greece, this gesture means the opposite, no. So these are just like a handful of gestures that we use every day. As you can see, your intended meaning could be offensive to others.
That is so helpful. I know that I speak with gestures and use my hands a lot, and so I find this really a great reminder that we have to be sensitive culturally to what others might be interpreting our gestures to mean.
Right. Interpreter taking notes. Quite often you will find interpreters take out a pad of paper and a pen to take notes. But however, the interpreter really should inform the attorney and her client that note-taking will be used at the beginning of the session. Note-taking is quite, used quite often. However, getting the permission first from those two parties, very important. The attorney, however, can also help by pointing out the location of the paper shredding bin to the interpreter at the end of the session. Notes should be destroyed before the interpreter leaves. the interpreter may be the only person that can understand those notes, because the interpreter might be the inventing his own symbols, maybe using shorthand that he understands. So an attorney or a client look at the notes may not be have any meanings to them. There are concepts that may not exist in the client's homeland. Okay, so I am going to point out just a couple things. Okay, insurance, co-payment, and human rights. These concepts are quite common in the United States, but it's possible that your client doesn't understand them. It is the attorney's responsibility to clarify these terms and concepts to the client. After all, the interpreter is there to help to communicate, and the source of the message should really come from the speaker. Avoid using jargon, acronyms, idioms, and technical terms. A short acronym stands for an entire concept or entire organization that must be fully explained. For example, CCIS. These 26 letters in the alphabet don't exist in some languages. Speakers should be aware of that, and she should be prepared to use the full term and provide an explanation of what the acronym stands for. Be prepared to explain in simple language when using legal terms. For example, cap-gap extension, provisional waiver. We are used to it. We are used to these terms, and therefore we use technical terms a lot during our conversation on a daily basis, and we take it for granted that our friends, our associates understand them without clarification or explanation. We sometimes make assumptions that the client have the same abilities, and be prepared to offer an explanation in simple language when using legal terms. Be prepared to explain when using idioms. I know I use that a lot during my everyday conversation with friends and associates. So replace idioms by using simple language in English. And the following are some examples of what I mean by idioms. What goes around comes around. No ifs, ands, or buts. Rain on your parade. Get a grip. Okay. Pay your dues. Idioms are concepts, and some of these idioms require longer phrases or a paragraph to explain. And when an interpreter has to explain a concept, please note that he is no longer interpreting exactly what the speaker has said. Pay your dues, for example. An interpreter might need to say, to have earned one's right to something through hard work or suffering. As you can see through this example, the interpreter had to use other words to communicate this concept, and it's much longer than the 3 words that in English. Help maintain clear communication when others are in the room. You can also help to take control by asking one person takes turn to speak. The interpreter does not want to miss any of the message. If 2 people speaking at the same time, so sometimes the communication is lost. Difficult situations and topics. And sometimes an interpreter had to deal with some of the very difficult topics like trauma, discrimination, persecution. CCIS would not send an interpreter knowingly. If we knew the topic would bother him, we would not send the interpreter there. But however, no matter how many training hours the interpreter complete and how many years of experience an interpreter has, it's next to impossible to prepare him for some of the topics such as war, rape, torture, trauma, and persecution. Recognize the client's and interpreter's body language is quite important. We ask the attorney, the provider for help by reading the interpreter and the client's body language. We are human beings, and don't be surprised if you see an interpreter got emotional. My suggestion is to give and take breaks in between. Let everyone take a deep breath as often as possible, walk away for a few minutes, and continue.
I find that sometimes having tissues and Kleenex available or a glass of water helps too.
Great suggestion. And what if the client is concerned about the interpreter's background? That comes up quite frequently. This issue is extremely difficult to address because one thing we find that is that we can't really question the interpreter's background without violating the interpreter's confidentiality and privacy. In some cases, the interpreter would view the trouble outweighs the work and pay. The interpreter could simply decline the work offered. Do not ask your interpreter to be alone with the interpreter, to be alone with the client. We don't want the client to take this opportunity to have a private conversation with the interpreter. Give out his personal contact information. For on-site interpreters, it's not appropriate to ask the interpreter for his personal phone number, contact information, but it's perfectly acceptable to take down his name so that an attorney can contact CCIS to request for a specific interpreter to attend the follow-up appointments. As I mentioned before, each interpreter is required to wear an ID card. Okay. Give client a ride. Again, we don't want the client to be alone with the interpreter, and we don't want to put your client's safety in the hands of the interpreters, and it would not be it would be unfair to the interpreter. To help an elderly client, sometimes the elderly client maybe have trouble like walking. Don't ask the interpreter for his personal opinions after the session. Do you think my client understands these issues? Okay. And do not ask the interpreter to perform written translation. Our language assessment exam is a verbal test. We have not tested the interpreter's written skills. So we don't want that person to be performing translations. Do not ask your interpreter to sign a confidentiality agreement. Okay. Each on-site interpreter has to provide what we call an encounter form for an attorney to sign at the end of the session. This is a form for the attorney to acknowledge the interpreter complete the work as agreed. The start time, the end time of the session should be legible, and in this form, the confidentiality statement is printed on this form. You should, however, make a Xerox copy of the encounter form. It has the confidentiality statement right above the interpreter's signature. if it's not signed by the interpreter, ask the interpreter to do it before making that Xerox copy. Advantages to use trained interpreters. A trained interpreter understands the code of ethics. It shows that you, the attorney, and the firm that you represent care about your client when an interpreter is used. You, the provider, wants to ensure the best possible communication is offered. And you don't want any malpractice suits or time-consuming complaints, and you want to ensure that the communication is, is reached. Allow extra time when using an interpreter. So keep that in mind. It takes much longer when everything is repeated, and sometimes the interpreter may stop the session for clarification. At this time, we're at the conclusion of the webinar, and I truly hope that this has helped you answering some of your questions and address some of the issues.
Thank you so much, Eddie. It doesn't look like we have any questions at this time. If people have questions for you, is it acceptable for them to email you at this email address?
Feel free to, send an email to me. Feel free to ask me questions. If you don't have questions now, that doesn't mean that you're not going to have questions later on. I'm here to help you to understand a little bit better. It makes our job easier if you understand how to use an interpreter. So feel free to reach out to me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Eddie, for your time. Thank you all for participating, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.